Hi, I'm Mary's. My sister tells people I'm the maid, that I just help around. Funny how that line always gets a laugh, especially when she's saying it in my house. They erased me one joke at a time until I wasn't even invited to sit at my own table. But the worst part? It wasn't the insult. It was the way they all agreed with her, with their silence. What would you do if your own family rewrote your life, right in front of you, and no one noticed? By the time I lit the last candle on the dining table, the sun had already started to dip below the trees lining the backyard. The amber light filtering through the blinds made everything look warmer than it felt. I adjusted the silverware one last time, stepped back, and inhaled the scent of roast chicken and rosemary. It was my mother's recipe, the one she used every March around this time. She called it her gathering meal. It was my idea to host everyone again. Same house, same table. Just fewer people now that Mom was gone. I'd bought the place 6 years ago, after clipping coupons and working 2 jobs for nearly a decade. Valora had moved in 2 years back, after her third separations, saying it would be temporary. But you know how temporary turns permanent when no one sets a line. Valora wasn't helping. Not with the food, not with the setup. She was upstairs for most of the afternoon, curling her hair, asking me through the closed door if the wine had been chilled. "They love Merlot," she called out. "Make sure it's not too warm. Oh, and remember to decant." I didn't respond. I just went back to polishing the glasses. The truth is, I didn't mind the work. I liked the quiet before people arrived, the sense of control. But something in me had started to shift lately. It was subtle, like a chair leg loosening beneath you. You don't fall, but you feel it wobble. They arrived around 5. First our cousin Tracy and her husband, then Aunt Rhonda with her bad knee and new boyfriend. Valora floated around the room like it was her stage, greeting everyone with air kisses and laughter that echoed just a little too loud. I stayed near the kitchen, filling glasses, checking the oven. And then it happened. Valora was pouring herself a second glass when someone Tracy, I think, asked, "Who did all this? The house looks amazing." Valora laughed, waving her hand like it was obvious. "That's Maurice, our little live-in maid, keeps the house running." I was standing just behind her, holding the bottle of Merlot Eid, brought up from the basement. Her words hit like a slap I wasn't supposed to feel. Everyone chuckled politely. Aunt Rhonda raised her eyebrows, as if to say, "Well, she's not wrong." No one corrected her, not a soul. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. I set the bottle down without a word and walked to the sink. I turned on the water not because I needed it, but because I needed something louder than my heartbeat. After a few minutes, I excused myself and walked upstairs. The party buzzed on below. No one noticed me leaving. In my bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the energy bill sitting on my nightstand. Valora had been the one to collect the mail that week. Her name was on the envelope. When I opened it, her name was also on the account. I blinked. Once. Twice. Then I reached under the bed for my old file box, the one where I kept mortgage records, utilities, insurance. My name had been there for years. All of it. This wasn't an accident. I leaned back against the wall, the edges of the file folder digging into my ribs. I remembered sitting at a folding table in the leasing office, signing papers with a pen I'd borrowed from the clerk because mine had dried out. I'd made every payment since. Alone. Downstairs, Valora laughed again. Her voice was unmistakable, bright, commanding, certain. The kind of voice people followed, even if they shouldn't. That night, I didn't go back down. I turned off the lamp, curled up with a blanket, and listened to the hum of the refrigerator downstairs and the occasional burst of laughter through the floorboards. In the dark, I stared at the picture on my dresser mom in her gardening hat, Valora grinning beside her. I wasn't in the frame. He'd taken the photo. It was always like that. I whispered. More to myself than to the night. I paid for the house, but am not even invited to stay. I woke early the next morning, earlier than usual. The light outside was soft, but my mood wasn't. I walked to the door, pulled the handle, and it didn't budge. The lock had been turned. From the outside, Valora's voice came through the wood, muffled but clear. I needed some peace and quiet. You don't mind, right? I didn't answer. I just stood there, hands still on the doorknob, heart still. And for the first time, I felt something inside me lean, not wobble, lean toward breaking. The click of the lock echoed louder than I expected. I stood on the inside of my bedroom door, hand still resting on the knob. Valora's voice had already faded down the hall. I needed some peace and quiet. You don't mind, right? It wasn't phrased like a question, and she didn't wait for an answer. I waited 5 minutes before opening the door again, not because I was unsure, just because I needed to breathe before facing her. When I finally stepped out, the hallway was empty, but the air felt heavy. I headed downstairs to start coffee, trying to ignore the new, sharp ache in my chest that had nothing to do with sleep position and everything to do with being dismissed. Later that day, Valora announced she was hosting a community dinner. Something about connecting with local women, an idea she insisted was in honor of Mom's legacy. I kept my thoughts to myself. What I didn't say, what I rarely said, was that Mom would have hated the spectacle of it all. The next few days were a blur of cleaning, planning, chopping, coordinating food deliveries. Valora handed me lists like I worked for her, not beside her. She practiced introductions in front of the mirror. Welcome! I am Valora, and this is our home, a space for growth and connection. She paused, then added under her breath, Oh, and Maris helps around. The night of the event, I dressed in simple black slacks and a blouse I hadn't worn in a while. I kept my hair pinned back. Valora, on the other hand, wore a satin jumpsuit and heels that made her taller than she already was. The living room had been rearranged, centerpieces set out. Everything looked like a magazine spread her version of our lives. Guests arrived with soft laughs and wine bottles, exchanging hugs and compliments. I greeted them quietly, kept the trays full, and cleared used napkins as the evening progressed. I didn't expect gratitude, but I also didn't expect what came next. I spotted the name cards on the long folding table Valora had rented. Her name sat squarely in the center, surrounded by community organizers and local businesswomen. As I scanned down the far end, I found mine. Not Maris, not host or co-organizer. Just Support Staff M. Barlow. I read it twice to be sure. One of the women smiled at me as she passed by. It's so lovely your sister helps you run this place. Not many people would take in family like that. Really speaks to your heart. I don't remember responding. I might have nodded. Maybe I smiled. I just remember stepping into the kitchen, away from the crowd, gripping the edge of the counter, while the hum of conversation faded into a low buzz behind me. I thought about the bank slip in my drawer upstairs, the one with my name on the mortgage. I thought about every bill I'd paid, every repair I'd scheduled, every late night I'd stayed up to fix the water heater when Valora wasn't home. I didn't confront her. Instead, I pulled out my phone and took a picture of the name card. Evidence. Not just for anyone else, but for me to remind myself I wasn't making this up. After the guests left, Valora sat on the couch, sipping her wine and scrolling through photos from the evening. She didn't mention the name cards. Didn't thank me. She just said, "Think we should do this monthly? Maybe a summer brunch next time. That aesthetic really works for my brand." I said nothing, just cleared the glasses. That night, I returned to the couch. My blanket had been folded and placed to the side, my pillow gone. I found it the next morning in the linen closet, as if it had always lived there. The bathroom felt different, too. My toothbrush wasn't in its usual spot. I checked the drawer, then under the sink. Nothing. When I asked, Valora shrugged. "Oh, I figured you'd want a fresh one." I tossed it. Didn't think it mattered. There was no shouting, no dramatic fight. Just small things going missing, my routine, my name, my presence. Each day chipped away at something I used to stand on. And then came the moment that told me something was off in a way I couldn't ignore. I went to the cabinet in the hallway to grab one of my folders, where I kept documents I didn't use often, but needed to keep close. Birth certificate, college transcripts, the original deed. The folder labeled House Maris Barlow was gone. Not misplaced. Gone. I checked the drawers twice, then a third time. Nothing. That was the moment the dull hum in my head turned sharp. She wasn't just rewriting the narrative for others. She was erasing me. Quietly. Confidently. Completely. I spent the better part of that afternoon kneeling on the hallway floor, pulling out storage bins one by one. Notebooks, old receipts, winter scarves I hadn't seen in years. I wasn't even sure what I was hoping to find anymore. The missing folder, maybe, or a reminder that I still existed in this house beyond the chores I did. Near the bottom of the last bin, tucked beneath an old photo album, I found the family scrapbook. The leather was cracking around the edges, and the pages smelled faintly of dried glue and perfume. I flipped it open slowly, dust rising into the afternoon light. Smiling faces. Valora's high school graduation. Our parents' anniversary dinner at that Italian place. Holidays filled with cousins and casseroles and plastic tablecloths. I kept turning pages. There were whole stretches of years with no sign of me at all. No photos from when I got my first job at the library. Nothing from the year I took care of Mom through her chemo. Not even a note about the closing on this house. It was like I had been present, but not worth remembering. The sharpest moments of my life, the nights I stayed up reviewing mortgage terms, the calls I made to plumbers and roofers, the groceries I kept stocked when Valora couldn't be bothered, they were nowhere to be found. It wasn't just neglect. It was deliberate absence. Later that evening, I was passing by the den when I heard Valora on speakerphone. I paused without meaning to. Her voice carried. "Yeah, I basically raised her," she was saying. She was always kind of dependent. I mean, sweet, but definitely not someone who could have handled all this on her own. I didn't move. The woman on the other end chuckled. "Well, you've done great with the place. She's lucky you let her stay." Lucky. I swallowed hard, stepped back, and shut the door quietly. Then I walked upstairs, opened my laptop, and searched my old student loan records. I scanned the balances I'd paid off alone, the shifts I'd picked up at night after my classes to afford textbooks and keep the lights on. I opened my tax return from the year Valora told me she'd take care of it and forgot. Again. She hadn't raised me. She hadn't saved me. She'd rewritten me. A few nights later, I got a text from my cousin Jessica. "Hey, you coming to Valora's dinner tonight?" I stared at the screen for a full minute. That was the first I'd heard about any dinner. I started to type out a response, then deleted it. I checked my calendar, my email, our shared reminders on the fridge, nothing. At first, I tried to convince myself it was an oversight. Maybe she assumed I knew. Maybe it slipped her mind. But when someone forgets you this many times, it's not a mistake. It's a message. I didn't reply. I put on a sweater, grabbed my keys, and drove through town. As I passed the restaurant, I saw them, Valora, Jessica, 3 other women seated by the window. Wine glasses raised, laughter spilling into the night air. There were 6 seats at the table. 5 were filled. 1 was stacked with jackets. No one was missing me. No one had asked where I was. I didn't stop. I just circled the block, went home, and opened a fresh document on my computer. At the top, I typed, "What they don't see," and I began writing everything. The moments, the comments, the omissions, the bills paid in my name, the name tags without my name, the events I hosted but didn't attend in their eyes. I wasn't being dramatic. I wasn't bitter. I was done being gaslit. I didn't fall out of the picture. I was erased. By the time the clock hit 10, I had 6 pages typed. It wasn't for anyone else yet, just me. Just a record, something real. The next morning, as I brewed coffee, Valora knocked on my bedroom door. Not hard, not angry, just casual. I opened it halfway. She was holding her phone. "Hey," she said, all lightness and gloss. "Do you remember what Mom paid for this house again? I need the number for something." I stared at her. For a long time. "You mean, what I paid?" She blinked. The pause that followed didn't scare me like it used to. It didn't confuse me. It confirmed everything I'd been writing. She had no idea how much she'd already lost. I came home that evening to find my pillow folded on the floor and my blanket stacked neatly on top of it. There was a note taped to the back of the couch in Valora's handwriting, hosting a Zoom panel tonight in the living room. Try to be quiet. No signature, no question mark. I didn't even sigh. I just stood there for a moment, looking at the note like it had been left by a stranger. And in some ways, maybe it had. The woman I used to call my sister had turned into someone who didn't ask. She assumed. Assumed the space, the silence, the control. I picked up my things and took them to the corner of the dining room, where the only outlet not being used by ring lights and chargers was still available. I sat down in the chair nearest the sliding glass door and pulled out my laptop. The hum of Valora's voice filled the house, polished, performative, and perfectly rehearsed. Around 8, I walked toward the kitchen to get some tea, and that's when I heard it. Her voice was clearer now, drifting through the open den where she had set up her virtual stage. She was on speakerphone with someone I couldn't tell who. A pause. Then she laughed lightly and said, "I've always been the one holding this family together." My sister? She's sweet, but honestly, she's always needed someone to keep her on track. I didn't breathe. I mean, if I hadn't taken her in, she went on, God knows where she'd be. And the house? That's been a group effort. She just manages the basics. The tea mug trembled in my hand. I'd stayed up late for years doing her taxes when she couldn't keep her business afloat. He'd covered her credit card bills just this once more times than I could count. When the pipes burst 2 winters ago, she'd been on a wellness retreat in Sedona. I was the one who dealt with it, called the plumber, signed the check. And now I was the basics. I set the mug down before I dropped it, walked back to the dining room, and grabbed my notebook. The spiral one I hadn't touched since Mom passed. I opened it, turned to a clean page, and started writing. If she's telling her story, I murmured to no one. I better have mine ready, too. The next day, I logged onto social media to check a work message and saw it almost immediately, Jessica's post. A photo of Valora seated at a restaurant table surrounded by women I'd known most of my life. The caption read, "Love our strong, beautiful matriarch." So proud of her. I wasn't tagged. I wasn't mentioned. I wasn't even in the background. I hadn't been invited. It wasn't the first time. But it was the first time I stopped telling myself there was a reasonable excuse. This wasn't poor planning. This was strategy. Later that night, I drove past the restaurant on my way to the grocery store. I saw them, Valora's head tossed back in laughter, gesturing with a glass of wine in hand, just like she always did when she was performing for a crowd. A woman leaned in toward her, and Valora grinned wide, then said loud enough for me to catch through the open patio, "She's still here? I thought she'd be gone by now. Feels like she's just clinging." I didn't park. I didn't slow down. I just kept driving, one hand tight on the steering wheel, the other clenched in my lap. Back at the house, I didn't unpack the groceries right away. I went straight to my room, opened my laptop, and started pulling files. Bank statements, utility records, screenshots of messages, receipts. My name, printed clearly at the bottom of page after page. I created a new folder on my desktop. Named it, My Side of the Story. Because that's what this was becoming. 2 stories, hers and mine. One loud and curated. One quiet and real. She wasn't just erasing the past. She was scrubbing me from the present. Before bed, I printed the first document tone of the earliest emails where she'd begged to move in after her divorce. "Just for a few weeks, Maris. I don't want to be a burden." I slid the paper into an envelope and tucked it in my nightstand drawer. The next morning, as I sipped coffee in the kitchen, Valora strolled in wearing a silk robe and carrying her planner. "We need to talk about next week's brunch," she said without looking up. "I'm inviting a few press contacts. I want the place spotless, so I'll need help before and during." I stared at her, slowly setting my mug down on the counter. "Not unless they're interviewing me." She froze, eyes finally meeting mine. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. She had hung my navy blue wrap dress on the outside of her closet door like it belonged to her. The hanger still had the dry cleaner tag I'd left on it after picking it up last month back when I thought I might wear it to something that mattered. Maybe to dinner, maybe somewhere I'd be seen. But here it was, dangling from her doorframe, half-zipped as if it had always been hers. She didn't ask. She never asked. I reached for it calmly, ran my hand along the neckline, and returned it to my closet without a word. Something inside me had settled not with peace, but with clarity. That was the morning I stopped waiting for her to notice what she was doing. I wasn't going to raise my voice, but had stopped whispering. That evening, I sat on the couch, scrolling absently through my phone, while Valora entertained a new client in the kitchen. A woman named Shannon, someone from a wellness podcast who'd flown in from Portland. I heard the clinking of glasses, the performance in Valora's laugh, then the words that made my spine stiffen. "I wanted you to have this," she said. I turned just enough to see Valora holding out a velvet box mold, square, and unmistakably familiar. "It belonged to my mother," she added. "A symbol of legacy and strength." She opened it. The necklace inside had a gold leaf charm on a thin chain. I'd seen my mother wear it on birthdays, church holidays, the day she signed her will. She told me once that it reminded her that strong things still bend in the wind. That necklace was meant for me. I knew it. Mom told me so directly the week before she died. No drama, just a promise. My breath didn't hitch. My hands didn't shake. Instead, I stood, walked up the stairs, and opened Valora's jewelry drawer. The box was still there now, empty. I picked it up and took it with me. When Valora came upstairs later, still glowing from her branding moment, I handed her the box. "This isn't about jewelry," I said. "It's about history, and I'm done watching you give away things you didn't earn." She blinked, then let out a short laugh. "Oh, come on. It's just a necklace, Maris. You really think this house, this stuff, makes you the martyr?" "No," I said quietly, "but I'm done letting you be the author." The next morning, I printed out every financial document I'd kept, copies of mortgage statements, wire transfers, texts shed, sent admitting she needed help, needed a place to stay. I organized them in a manila envelope and wrote 2 words on the front in black marker: "If pushed." At dinner that night, I sat across from her as she scrolled through her phone, one leg crossed, fork tapping on her salad plate. "If this continues," I said, "I'll stop being quiet. And trust me, you won't like the sound of me." She didn't look up, just kept scrolling. "What are you gonna do?" she said finally. "Sue me for being loved more?" I didn't respond. I just folded my napkin and stood. The silence I left in my place spoke louder than I ever could. The next afternoon, I met Inez for tea. We sat outside a cafe near the courthouse, the kind with mismatched mugs and real sugar cubes. I didn't tell her everything just enough. She stirred her coffee, then looked at me. "Your mother once told me you were the spine of this house." I smiled slightly. "Spines get tired." "They do," she said, "but they don't break unless you let them." On the way home, I stopped at the print shop, picked up another copy of the deed, made sure the county clerk had the original on file. I was done asking to be considered. Now, I was demanding to be documented. That night, after a late dinner, I was reviewing email when I saw its subject line bold at the top of the screen. Confirmation, home ownership, validation, Valora Barlow. I stared at it, not because it shocked me, but because it didn't. She wasn't just bluffing anymore. She was trying to make it real. I read the email 3 times, just to make sure I wasn't misinterpreting it. Confirmation, home ownership, validation, Valora Barlow. That's what the subject line said. Not a mistake, not a typo. It was deliberate like everything else she'd done lately. And for the first time, I saw it clearly. Valora wasn't just pushing me aside. She was rewriting the narrative in permanent ink. She wasn't waiting for me to leave. She was building a life that didn't include me at all. The next morning, while checking the mailbox, I found a thick pamphlet addressed to her. Glossy front cover. A photo of Valora in front of the house, arms folded confidently beneath the headline, Meet Sacramento's Most Grounded Visionary. Inside, page 5, a quote beneath her smiling face read, I turned my family home into a space of healing, a sanctuary for stories and success. That house was mine. I opened my laptop, created a new folder on my desktop, and titled it Chamber Filing. I pulled the deed, scanned in my bank records, time-stamped utility bills in my name, and every photo I could find of me signing papers at the notary. No emotion, just logistics. If she wanted to go public, then it'd show the paper trail. It was still early afternoon when I filed the formal property claim response. I attached every document and requested confirmation of submission. Once it was done, I didn't feel relief. I felt like the hammer had just been lifted, not dropped, but waiting. Later that evening, a thought gnawed at me, one that had crept in a few weeks earlier and now refused to leave. I logged into my credit report and scrolled down. There it was, under recent activity, an application for a $40,000 personal loan. Listed reason, Home-based wellness center. Applicant name, Maris Barlow. My stomach turned. I clicked through the digital trail. It wasn't just the name, it was my social, my address, and even my scanned signature on the application. I hadn't authorized any of it, but I didn't scream. I didn't storm into her room. I printed every page, 3 copies each. One went to my personal folder, one I would deliver to the bank fraud division, and one went to my attorney. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, under the same pendant light Mom had insisted on keeping when we remodeled. I drafted a fraud alert, notified the credit bureau, and typed out a simple statement for the lawyer. I ended it with, "This was not me, but I know exactly who it was." I left no emotion in the message. It was all numbers and dates, no room for doubt, no opportunity for her to twist the truth. After I sent the email, I got up and changed the lock on my bedroom door. Then, I pulled out the small security camera I'd bought online but never installed. It took me 10 minutes to mount it discreetly above the porch. Just enough to catch her face. Just enough to catch her intentions. When it was done, I sat on the couch, listening to the silence of the house that used to feel like mine. And I realized I wasn't quiet because I was afraid. I was quiet because I'd been preparing. Around 11:45 that night, Valora came home. I heard the car pull in, tires crunching over the gravel too fast. Then the slam of the door. A few moments later, the jingle of key stew many, too loud, and the sudden, sharp pounding on the front door. "Mary's!" she shouted. "Open up!" The pounding grew harder. She sounded drunk, slurring just enough to smear her words. "I know you're in there. You're seriously locking me out now? This is how you treat family?" I watched her through the screen of the monitor. The camera light glowed red, pulsing like a warning signal. I didn't move. She kept knocking, cursing under her breath. Then louder. She tried calling me twice, and I let the calls ring out. She rattled the handle again, muttering about how I was acting insane and selfish. Still, I didn't flinch. I stayed seated, wrapped in a shawl, hands warm around my tea mug. And when the knocking finally stopped, when she stepped back into the light of the porch and looked up directly at the camera, I leaned in slightly, just enough to speak under my breath. "You don't live here. Not anymore." The envelope was thick, heavy for something so petty. I found it shoved halfway through the mail slot, sealed in bright red, with urgent legal stamped across the front. Valoris Retaliation had arrived right on schedule. Inside was a cease and desist letter, complete with a list of fabricated events and exaggerated claims, accusations of emotional abuse, financial manipulation, and ongoing harassment from me, the alleged aggressor. At the bottom, her signature curled like a flourish of victory. It didn't shake me. It didn't even surprise me. I tucked the packet into my growing evidence folder and whispered under my breath, "So this is how you want to play." The next morning, I sat on the floor in my room, going through old digital files on my laptop. A memory hit me like a flashbulb the moment, 6 months ago, when Valora had handed me a packet of papers and said, "Sign this real quick. It's just for the shared bank account, to simplify billing." Back then, I didn't think twice. She made it sound like it was routine, like it was already handled, and I was the final checkbox. Now, I found the scan in my archive. I opened the file and stared at it. It wasn't a bank authorization. It was a disguised property transfer request. My signature was their mine, in black ink, clean and compliant. She hadn't just tricked me. She'd played me like I was background noise in my own life. I forwarded the file to my attorney with a brief note. She's been planning this for months. Then, I added it to the evidence folder and backed it up twice. Later that week, Valora organized a family meeting her term, not mine. She didn't ask if I was available. Just left a voicemail. There'll be some folks over Sunday at 3. Just be ready. It's important. I wasn't surprised when Inez and a few of our extended relatives showed up that afternoon. The living room had been staged like a showroom, flowers, light jazz, even finger sandwiches she didn't make. Valora stood in the center like she was giving a TED Talk. This house, she began, was always meant to represent strength and legacy. In honor of Mom, I've decided to formalize the ownership process to reflect that. My cousins nodded politely, not fully understanding. I stood, calmly. No script, no notes, just truth. That's interesting, I said, because I just submitted the official deed to the county clerk last week, with my name on it. Silence dropped into the room like a stone in still water. Valora's smile cracked. She turned toward me, eyes sharp, voice tense. You're making this into something it doesn't have to be. No, I replied. You already did that. I'm just documenting it. I left the room before she could argue. I didn't need her approval. I needed her to feel the shift. That night, the knock on my bedroom door wasn't light or uncertain. It was pounding. You think this house makes you somebody? She yelled. I stood on the other side of the door, calm, not flinching. No, I said, but your lies won't make you someone either. There was a pause. Then, her voice dropped lower, almost seething. You want war? You've got it. I didn't answer. The next morning, a text came in from a blocked number. You don't know what I'm capable of. I didn't panic. I didn't even feel afraid. I picked up my phone, pressed record on the voice memo app, and said clearly, let's find out. I woke up before the sun, showered, and dressed in clothes I hadn't worn since the last real interview I had. Slacks, low heels, a muted blouse, hair tied back, no perfume. I didn't want anything on me that could be called theatrical. I pulled the manila envelope from my desk drawer, the one I'd labeled Truth a month earlier, and slid it into my purse. I didn't check its contents again. I didn't need to. I'd read every page so many times they'd burned into me. Today, I whispered into the stillness of the house, I stop asking to be believed. Today, I bring proof. I left without saying a word to Valora. She was still asleep, or pretending to be. Either way, I wasn't playing her game anymore. At the courthouse, the mediation room was colder than expected. Fluorescent lights hummed above. Valora sat at the far end of the long table, back straight, chin up, her image consultant beside her, blonde, sharp-shouldered, expressionless. The mediator greeted us with practiced neutrality. Valora launched into her version of the story, voice soft but soaked with implication. I've tried to create stability in this home, she said, despite my sister's emotional volatility. She's been erratic, difficult, and at times even threatening. I've had to carry so much. I let her finish. Every sentence was another thread in the costume she'd sewn for herself. I waited for the room to quiet before I reached into my purse. I laid the envelope on the table, slid it across slowly. Inside, a signed deed with my name, mortgage statements, photographs from family events with captions edited to remove my name, a tax return listing me as the sole filer on the property, and last in page 17, notarized letter from Mom's estate lawyer. It read clearly, Maris Barlow is the sole legal owner of the home at 2326 Delaney Lane, purchased entirely by her. Valora's mouth twitched, just slightly. The mediator adjusted his glasses and looked up. "Ms. Barlow," he said, speaking to her now. "Do you have anything to dispute this?" She said nothing. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. I just looked at her and then at the woman beside her, whose arms were now crossed a little tighter. Then came a knock at the door. Inez entered, quietly but with presence. She carried a small folder, worn at the corners, and nodded politely to the room before walking to the center. "I believe this belongs here," she said, opening the folder. "It was in my files. Your mother asked me to hold on to it." She handed over a handwritten letter. Not typed, not edited, just ink and time. She asked me not to share it unless Maris was ever questioned. I guess that moment's here. The mediator read aloud, "Maris paid the price of silence. Let her name be remembered. This house is hers. She earned it, when no one else bothered to show up." Valora's face lost color. The room was silent, except for the slow turn of pages. I didn't gloat. I just breathed for the first time in weeks, really breathed. Later that evening, a friend texted me a link. Community coach exposed in property dispute. It wasn't the New York Times. But it didn't have to be. The headline traveled fast through the community. I didn't share the link, didn't comment. But I got a message from one of Valora's old allies, someone who'd praised her workshops for years. "I'm sorry I didn't see it earlier," they wrote. "You deserved better." I didn't respond. Just sat in the living room with a mug of tea, the house unusually quiet. There were no victory banners, no balloons, just silence. Not the kind that punishes, but the kind that frees. Around 10, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Valora stood in the kitchen, boxes around her, packing methodically. She didn't speak. I walked over, held out a small envelope. She looked down. It was the house key. She reached for it. As I turned to walk away, I said, steady and calm, "Good luck with the mortgage." The quiet wasn't unfamiliar. It was just different now. For the first time, it wasn't forced silence from being ignored or dismissed. It was earned, claimed. I walked through each room slowly, barefoot, the floor creaking beneath my steps like it was learning me all over again. Valora's boxes were gone. The vanity in the guest room, the piles of shoes in the foyer, her vision boards taped to the fridge all vanished. The air felt clearer, like the walls had exhaled something they'd been holding back. In the dining room, I opened a storage bin I hadn't touched in years. Inside were receipts faded from time, photos I thought I'd lost, and a Ziploc bag of Mom's recipe cards. Her handwriting, curved, slightly slanted, stained with olive oil in places, was the only part of her that hadn't been reinterpreted or repackaged by Valora. This house never needed a judge to decide who it belonged to. It remembered. A ping from my phone pulled me back. It was from the mortgage company, confirmation that the loan had been officially reset me name, and mine alone. No disputes, no co-signers, no shared history lingering on paper. I didn't screenshot it. I just read it once, closed the app, and set the phone down. Outside, the world was still, birdsong woven into the breeze coming through the open window. On social media, Valora had gone silent. Her pages were either set to private or gone entirely. The influencer turned into a whisper. A few days later, a letter came addressed in her name but typed impersonal, cold, like someone copying a legal template. "I guess you won," it read. That was all. I folded it carefully and slid it into the file I'd labeled Truth. I didn't need to shred it. I wanted to keep it. A souvenir from the battlefield. That weekend, I met Inez for coffee at the little cafe near the library. We sat outside, beneath an awning that fluttered each time the breeze shifted. She wore the same pale blue cardigan she always wore when she had something to say, but didn't want to rush it. After a few minutes, she reached into her bag and pulled out a photo. It was me. 16, maybe 17, holding a box of groceries in front of the old apartment building we used to live in. Valora wasn't in the frame. "You were always carrying things no one saw," Inez said softly. I didn't say anything right away. Just looked at the picture like it was someone I barely remembered, but still somehow loved. Thank you, I said, not just for the photo, for seeing me then and now. We clinked our coffee mugs gently, no need for toast or speeches. That moment was enough. When I got home, I walked through the hallway slowly and paused outside the guest room. The bed was bare, the walls blank. I opened the closet, pulled out a few boxes of books I'd been meaning to sort, and got to work. By sunset, I'd turned the space into something new. A chair by the window, a reading lamp, shelves filled with novels and biographies. I placed a framed copy of one of Mom's recipes on the desk, quiet reminder of her, the version of her that lived in me, not the one Valora tried to perform. A few days later, I signed up to volunteer at the local literacy center. Twice a week, I sat with strangers who were trying to find their words, their voices, sometimes for the first time. And I listened. Out back, the garden began to sprout. Tomatoes, basil, lavender all thriving in soil that had finally been left alone. I didn't post about it. I didn't announce anything. I didn't need to. I built something they couldn't take a self, that didn't need to be announced to be real. That evening, I sat by the window with a cup of tea. No music, no noise, just the light fading, the day softening its grip. I didn't smile, but I didn't flinch either. She left through the same door I opened for her. But I stayed. And that was the difference. I used to believe that if I stayed quiet long enough, someone would notice, that if I kept giving, kept sacrificing, my worth would eventually speak for itself. But silence doesn't protect you from being erased. Sometimes it hands them the pen. The truth is, your peace doesn't come from being accepted by others. It comes from finally choosing yourself, even if no one else claps for you. And if you're standing at the edge of your own story, wondering whether you have the right to take up space, let this be your permission. You do. You always did. So let me ask you, have you ever been written out of your own life? Have you ever stayed too long where you were only tolerated, not valued? If this story resonated with you, drop a 1 in the comments or let me know where you're watching from. And if it didn't, I'd love to hear why. Real stories connect us, even when they're hard. If this video touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There are more stories coming, stories of truth, healing, and the quiet kind of strength that changes everything. Thank you for listening.